Hi everyone, this is Anthony O'Flynn coming to you from the Sunshine Coast, and tonight I'll be discussing part 3 of the election predictions. And if you haven't watched the part 1 and part 2, it's perhaps best to watch those two before this video, because I'll be building on the themes that I've introduced in the previous 2 videos. The last video I discussed the triad of power and the political, social and economic components of that triad. And ultimately with the election now, well, polling's actually already started. The outcome of the election is basically the formation and the construction or even deconstruction of political power, because in this election, in my view, it is perhaps the most historic election we've ever had here in Australia, and probably the most important. And it really is time to hold the politicians accountable individually. And as far as I'm concerned, their application for a job, pretty much for nearly all of them, they should be sacked. And the only way to convey the total dissatisfaction by the Australian public is to sack all of these politicians. And there are a number of exceptions, and I'll get to those, but this is the opportunity that we have, and it only comes around once every 3 years, and for some of the senators, because the election for the Senate is once every 6 years, that they don't seem to listen. I mean, consider how many videos that have been made over the course of the last 2 years since the pandemic started. How many videos have been made? How many protests have been made? How many signs at protests have been made? How many people have been to protests? How many social media posts have there been? How many comments? How many petitions have been signed? How many phone calls have been made? How many in-person visits have been made? How much rhetoric has there been against these politicians, these complete parasites, and yet they completely refuse to listen to the demands of the people who are their employers. We are their employers, and they just seem to have lost sight of that completely here in Australia and of course around the world. And this weekend is our chance to hold them accountable. So as I've mentioned in the previous video, I consider not voting from the point of view that you just think it's a complete waste of time. I'm opposed to that. I don't agree with that. And if you're not on the electorate roll or something like that, it's a little bit of a different scenario. But to actively not vote or not participate because you think that none of the politicians are good and all that those sort of belief systems, well then how can you complain about the outcome if you don't even participate in the voting process? And it goes deeper than that, because some people, they actually just want to be against everything. They don't actually want to be for anything. And this is the difficult part, because from what I'm seeing is that this campaign to put the majors last, all the rhetoric around that, has been very successful. And we'll see how successful it's been in the outcome of the election. But the thing to understand is that it's very easy just to oppose everything. That's the easy part. But the more difficult part is actually being for something. And this election will be historic, because I believe there's going to be a massive swing against ALP, LNP for primary voting, absolutely, and a real swing towards independents and some of the freedom parties, the minor parties. So this will be one trend that will be will catch the mainstream media by surprise. I'm sure there's some elements are aware that this is actually going to occur, but they just simply ignore it and or suppress it because they don't want to encourage it. You can see the basic oxygen that they give to the alternative parties, the freedom parties and the independent candidates is pretty close to zero. And it shows that they're just trying to funnel everyone into this ALP, LNP duopoly. And this weekend is our chance to end that. And of course, it will take some election cycles, I believe. But this is the chance for us to let the politicians know that if they don't do what we say, they're out. It's as simple as that. It doesn't matter if they're in opposition. I mean, look at what they've voted on. You can go and actually look on different websites to see how they've voted, and you'll be shocked. So the idea even that there is an opposition is a complete smokescreen. There is no real opposition in this country. There never has been. It's never been more apparent than what's occurring now, that they're actually preferencing each other, ALP, LNP, preferencing each other over the minor parties and the independents. So it shows the state of disarray that they're in. They've lost the support of the electorate. And there's even examples such as in the seat of Kooyong, which is held by Josh Frydenberg, that there's an independent there that's really going to give him a run, and he may possibly lose his seat, which is something that we would have expected to be unheard of for the Treasurer to lose their seat. I mean, the Prime Minister has only lost their seat, I think it's twice in the history of federal politics. Once was Stanley Melbourne Bruce, and most recently was John Howard lost his seat to Maxine McHugh in that election in 2007. So what we're seeing in the freedom movement is this opposition to the major parties, which is becoming more and more mainstream, becoming more popularised, which is good. And the tricky part, which I'll go into this video, the difficult part is actually finding who to support. So I encourage people to do their research and work out who a suitable candidate is, because this idea of voting the sitting member last, there has some merit. But the problem is that you could just be voting in the alternative. So if it's a Liberal candidate is a sitting member, then they just might be replaced by ALP. And we're back to square one, basically. So this is something that needs to be given some serious consideration before you vote, because voting out the sitting member is not enough. It's that how do we channel the energy, the votes into the candidate that can actually get voted. So let me give you a run through to understand the difficulty or the statistics as they are now. In the House of Representatives currently, there are 75 LNP, 68 Labor, 1 Green in the seat of Melbourne, 1 UAP, which is obviously Craig Kelly, 1 Katter Party, which is obviously Bob Katter up in northwest Queensland, Mount Isa, that sort of area. It's a huge electorate, that one. 1 Centre Alliance, and 4 independents, including George Christensen, who won't be running as a Liberal candidate for the seat of Dawson in this election. He's going to be on the ticket for the Senate for One Nation, and he will be third on the ticket. Okay, so the point is that the House of Representatives has very, very few members that are not in the Liberal Labor Party, and then even just 1 for the Greens. So for those candidates the people are considering, what you really need to consider is who really has a chance of actually getting elected in terms of a party. Now, this is the difficult process, because in this paradigm of the candidates and the political arena, we really have a low-level candidate. I mean, personally, none of those politicians represent me, my values, my beliefs, what I stand for at all. I'm not a member of any political party. I don't advocate any individual candidates. But if you go back to my first video, my premise is simply that any loss of a Liberal, Labor, National or Greens seat in this election is a win. For me, it doesn't matter who it goes to. Now, this is where it becomes contentious, because there is this ongoing infighting, division and bickering with all of these candidates of basically who we shouldn't vote for. And there's very little positive sentiment of who we should vote for. Now, this has to be split into 2 logically. And as I've been saying, we need to leave the emotion out of this. And we need to be more rational, more coherent, with more discernment. Because there is firstly, the candidate that's probably having the most integrity, we know is going to be honest, going to be trustworthy, all these sorts of things, which is wonderful. There's a lot of candidates out there that we've seen come through who are going to at least showing that intent. And we all know that politicians are pathological liars, but this new sort of breed of independents and so on, they do appear to have good intentions. But the second part is more complicated, because the second part is who is actually going to get elected, who has a real chance of getting elected. And therefore, you can be voting for someone who, in your heart, you think this person's the right candidate, but actually, in fact, your vote is pretty much going to be a waste because they haven't got a chance of getting elected. And this is the problem that we face, because with so many independents and minor parties running, they're basically going to take votes off each other. And this means that there'll be a splitting of the vote. And actually, I predict in this election, because there'll be such a movement away from the major parties, that you'll find the primary vote of candidates that do get elected will be much lower. So it'll be much lower, and that will be a trend you'll see in various different seats. So this is something to really think about, because it's also important to consider from going forward for the next election is what momentum do we give to certain parties and certain candidates, and who do we want to see ultimately get elected? Because this game just doesn't end tomorrow. In fact, it's just one round. But it is important to consider this from the point of view also, as I've read out those numbers, that it's actually very difficult to get elected to the House of Representatives, as you can see from the seat allocation there. So it's important to understand that there are two basic elections we should think of it on the weekend. There is one for the House of Representatives and there's one for the Senate. And the Senate is where there is the biggest opportunity to create radical change. So we have half Senate elections. The candidates or the senators are only standing for election once every 6 years. So basically the preferences, as I've spoken about in the previous video, are so important, particularly for the Senate, because we can see that there is much potential for change here. So as the Senate currently stands, it's 35 LNP, 26 Labor, and 15 crossbenchers. So 9 of those are Green, 2 One Nation, 1 Senate Alliance, 1 Lambie Network, 1 Patrick Team, and 1 Liberal Democrat. So this means that basically we have a much diverse representation across the spectrum of the different parties, the different candidates in the Senate. And the Senate vote is important. If you vote above the line, you must number at least six boxes, 1 to 6 as a minimum. And if you vote below the line, it's different. Now, 97% of people will actually vote above the line. So that's how it will really work out there. Now, in Queensland, there are 6 seats up for re-election. 3 are currently held by LNP, 2 by Labor Party, and 1 by One Nation, which is Pauline Hanson. And so those 6 seats are available for re-election to be contested in this election. Now, according to my calculations, LNP currently holding 3. It's likely that they're going to lose 1. Amanda Stoker is likely to lose her seat, and Matt Canavan and James McGrath are likely to get re-elected. From the Labor seats, Murray Watt is likely to get re-elected, and Anthony Chisholm is likely to lose his seat, or it's possible. And then One Nation, Pauline Hanson, I'm pretty certain she's going to get re-elected easily. So therefore, there's 2 seats there that are contestable, genuinely contestable. And the preferences are really going to influence the outcome of that. Of those 2 seats, well, I don't think that Campbell Newman's got a chance. I really don't see him polling that well. It's possible that Raj Guruswamy, who is running second on the seat for One Nation, on the ticket for One Nation, they will get enough of a quota to get 2 seats in the Senate. George Christensen is running number 3. It's highly, highly unlikely that he will get a Senate seat. However, his presence on the ticket and his presence in the party will boost the One Nation vote a lot. And then, of course, there's the wild card of Clive Palmer, representing obviously UAP. He is likely to poll much better than what he did in the last election, and the sentiment around the rejection of the major parties will favour his vote, and also I believe that UAP will do very well on preferences in the Senate. So there are a lot of other alternatives. A lot of other very good people have been very courageous, been very committed to the cause of running for the Senate, the Freedom Parties, the Independents, and all the people there who are putting their name forward. So I wish everyone the best of luck there. That's just a seat of Senate in Queensland. So really, that's how it looks to me. Obviously, it's a more traditionally conservative voting pattern in the Senate in Queensland. So it looks like, in terms of the overall movement against LNP, they'll lose 1 seat. Labor possibly lose 1 seat. Pauline Hanson will keep her seat, which means there's 2 seats really there that are really genuinely contestable. It will not be easy for any of the independents or the Freedom Parties to get elected, but it's possible, and I hope that I'm wrong, that all the Liberal Party and Labor Party lose all their seats in the Senate. I would happily be completely wrong about that. I'd be the first one to congratulate all of the independents in the minor parties for winning a seat in the Senate. That would be fantastic. However, it's a big mountain to climb and a lot of votes to be elected to the Senate in Queensland. It's needed about 500,000 votes, which is a lot. It's a lot of votes. And of course, some of these principles apply to the other states in terms of preferences and so on. It's very important who you give your preferences to, because if you kind of think, oh, I'll vote for one of the minor parties, one of the Freedom Parties first, but then you think, oh, my second choice is usually Labor or Liberal or Greens or whatever, then that vote could be disproportionately more important the way you've preferenced it as the votes are counted, as the candidates are eliminated, as the preferences are distributed. So you really have to think very careful about that, and that's why there's this campaign to vote Liberal, Labor, Greens, Nationals last. In the Senate, of course, you only have to number a minimum of 6 boxes, so you don't even have to put them in your allocation, the way you're allocating it at all. So we're basically at the crossroads now here, and it will be a very interesting vote count. Obviously, with the Senate, we won't know the outcome for days after the election. We won't be able to know the outcome, but we'll get a fair idea on election night. It really is a real eye-opener just to see how many people are actually getting on board with this idea of voting out the Labor-Liberal duopoly. It's a shame to see there's so much division. People really need to unite behind candidates and parties, and we don't have that cohesion yet. We don't have that unity yet. It's disappointing to see some people using their influence in ways to that actually ultimately help split the vote and actually indirectly supporting the Liberal-Labor duopoly through this division. But we're at the early stages yet, and obviously people have got a lot of growing up to do, and to start to see that we need to stand united, and we need to really think about the future for Australia, because many things are happening quickly. This latest thing is this whole thing with the WHO, this treaty that's been spoken about, and basically we're going down the path of outsourcing the decisions that we're making as how we run our country to people who live overseas and to people who are unelected. And if that continues, the question you have to ask yourself is, what's the point even having these politicians that we elect in the first place if they're not even responsible for the decisions for things like lockdowns, for various mandates and so on regarding the health crisis, whatever, how you want to think about it. It means that we're no longer in a democracy and Australia is no longer a sovereign country. Now, some people would argue that that's been the case going back to the 70s with the Lima Agreement and the other things that have been built on since then. But what we have to think about is that, do we want to live in a sovereign country, or do we want these international influences dictating on how we govern ourselves and what kind of things we're allowed to do and not allowed to do? And that's the path we're going on down. And both Scott Morrison has advocated this very strongly in a recent statement to the press, and Albanese has also made comments that WHO should be strengthened and so on with our ties to WHO. This is a complete outrage, and I cannot actually believe that they're casually passing off our sovereignty to overseas unelected bureaucrats, people that are not responsible and not held accountable in the electorate here in Australia. It's total insanity, and this must end, and let's put a real dent in the primary vote, at least for this weekend. Hopefully we can get some independent candidates elected to both the House of Representatives and the Senate, even just the minor parties. Any loss of seats to the Labor, Liberal duopoly, and also the Greens, which are tipped to actually win more seats in the Senate. They already have seats in every state. And we need to put the brakes on, at least for another election cycle, before we can get better organised, have a more coherent approach, a more unified approach, and stand together for the kind of Australia that we want to see going into the future. Thanks for watching. All the best.